Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Debbie, and I am an account manager with ArchVision. And today we have Kyle Burns from Trimble joining us to talk about SketchUp Studio. Kyle has a background in architecture, and that focus is on historic preservation and adaptive reuse. He also has a young son that he likes to go hiking with in Oregon. So we're excited to hear about that as well. But anyway, today's focus again will be SketchUp Studio. And Kyle, I will turn it over to you. Thank you and welcome.
Great, thanks a lot. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and let's get started. All right, I'm gonna assume that everyone can see my screen just fine. And today we are going to talk about SketchUp Studio, SketchUp's most powerful tool set. Just another quick introduction about myself and why I am speaking to you today. My name is Kyle Burns, and I'm a customer success manager here at SketchUp. I support all of our government customers and our West Coast key accounts, where I am located in Central Oregon. My background is an architectural designer, and I've worked in various firms across the country, including San Francisco, Cincinnati, where I'm originally from, and kind of found my love of historic preservation. And lastly, in Portland, Oregon, where I did a lot of work with the National Park Service, which was super cool and what I studied for my master's. So I was fortunate enough to travel to places like Yosemite National Park and do renovations of the cabins and tent villages there, and even designing new viewing platforms and pathways for lava tubes and caves in Northern California, which is really cool. And as mentioned, I do have a young son. His birthday is actually today. He turns 1, so that young son is officially a toddler, and I like to get him into the woods and onto the ski slopes to hopefully enjoy the same things that I do and why I moved to Central Oregon in the first place. But enough about me. Let's talk about what we're going to go over today. We're going to go briefly over the SketchUp ecosystem and how SketchUp Studio fits into that. And SketchUp Studio really includes our SketchUp desktop modeler, SketchUp Pro, with the addition of 3 really valuable extensions. That is the Revit Importer, Scan Essentials, and Chaos Group's V-Ray. And then we will have a quick Q&A at the end of the session as well. So let's talk briefly about SketchUp and the ecosystem in the design and build life cycle. So SketchUp is a great modeling software that really can be used at any phase in the design process. A lot of times it's used in early conceptual and schematic modeling, and that's really one of the most important pieces of the design phase. That's where we are getting our alternatives, we're learning and asking questions about the program and really what a building or a design is seeking to accomplish, and continuing this iterative process throughout design development, even in the construction documentation and construction administration. So getting the data early is really, really important, and that's where Scan Essentials may fit into the project. So scanning existing conditions of a building if we're doing a renovation or a tenant improvement, or scanning a complex site if we've got a cool building that's maybe on a difficult terrain or has a lot of adjacent buildings that we need to pay respect to in order to, help a successful project next to a park or with some historic buildings next to it, and we want to continue that urban fabric. Getting that data early in the project is really, really important. And then as we continue to use SketchUp throughout our project, whether that be SketchUp in the desktop modeler, or maybe SketchUp on the iPad if we're designing on site, if we're doing presentations and walking through the site, we continue that into design development. Maybe we're going to use the 3D warehouse to get some context and generate some cool visualizations. That's going to move into getting some maybe photorealistic renderings with V-Ray, or maybe we're using the Revit importer to bring in more detailed and complex models from consultants or collaborators into SketchUp's intuitive environment, populating it and doing some renderings, and then pushing that out into layout, maybe creating some construction documentation or visualization packages. Those really nice design proposals or packages that we send out to the owners reps, to the public who may want to really understand what new buildings are coming into their neighborhood or on their street or into their new city. So SketchUp can be used at any time in the design project or process. So SketchUp Studio, like I said, is those 3 extensions, and they all plug in to SketchUp's desktop modeler. One thing to really be aware of this is really a Windows-only offering. Revit is a Windows-only software anyway, and honestly, most architects, especially in the commercial sector, are working on Windows machines. Smaller firms or maybe residential architects may be working on Macs, but the Revit importer in the Scan Essentials is only going to work on Windows machines. V-Ray will work for Windows and Mac machines, and that's usually much further down in the project as well, when we've maybe detailed out a lot of things, and maybe we're using this for marketing or new proposals to win similar work. V-Ray is really after the project has probably been completed, and we want to create some really great, interesting images to bring in tenants, to help market for businesses that are maybe going to be occupying the ground floor of a structure. So just keep that in mind. It's important that if you're a Mac only office, Studio may not be the best option for you, but that's why we have some different offerings as well. So SketchUp has a lot of different subscription tiers. We want to make sure that SketchUp is applicable to any sort of user, those small firms to those large firms as well. We're going to focus on Studio today, which encompasses all of our offerings from SketchUp for Desktop all the way to those 3 extensions. But there is sort of a middle ground with ProScan and Advanced Workflows. ProScan is going to give you SketchUp plus Scan Essentials, which is that point cloud viewer. Advanced Workflows is going to give you Scan Essentials and the Revit importer. And then Studio is going to give you Revit importer, Scan Essentials, and V-Ray. So if you have any questions about this, of course, please reach out to us. We're happy to talk more about these subscription offerings. But let's talk about the good stuff here in SketchUp Studio. First, I'm going to talk about the Revit importer. This is a great tool if you are working in Revit or working with consultants, contractors, or collaborators that are working in Revit. Revit is a pretty difficult software to get up and running with. It's not really intuitive. It's not an overly design-oriented software. It's a documentation software. And it's difficult to share those models back and forth with people who are not directly at the office working in Revit. So importing into SketchUp's environment optimizes these models and puts them into our intuitive toolset environment. So we can maybe start to do more design iterations. We can do some presentations. We can create visualizations. We can share that with a lot more people. We can do fly-throughs. We can do animations. We can do a lot of stuff once we've taken this file into SketchUp. And it doesn't require a user to have Revit as well. So not every project needs to have Revit. Not every commercial building needs that extent, that level of detail that Revit offers. So bringing that into SketchUp, being able to iterate, being able to ask questions is really, really important. And it brings in Revit families, turns them into SketchUp components. It brings in the organization and Revit family categories into SketchUp tags. So we can toggle the visibility. We can really start to generate content and visualizations that are going to help us sort of in our part of the project. And I'm going to go through all of this in a demo as well to really touch on the nuances of the importer and why I think it's valuable, and go through a couple potential workflows and use cases. This is just a quick GIF that kind of shows that importer really, really quickly coming in. So being able to quickly edit and manipulate geometry and organization It's not going to require any new skills for that SketchUp user to get the Revit information into SketchUp and start generating value from it. So even these really quick animations and orbiting around is pretty difficult to dial in Revit. So putting that into SketchUp just makes that project probably go further in an easier way and getting sort of more eyes on the prize. I personally think that the more feedback, the more people that are working on a project, it's going to be more successful. If only one person's idea of a project goes through, that's their opinion of a project. We want to engage with the community. We want to engage with shareholders, stakeholders, collaborators at our office, and structural designers, MEP designers, so we can ensure that we have a successful project. If no one is looking at that Revit file because it's a complicated software to use, chances are that's not going to be a very successful project. Maybe the architect has viewed that as a successful project, but if they can't share that with the folks that are occupying that building and not having the opportunity to provide feedback, it's sort of gambling. So I think the more people that can view what's going to be built, the better chance that we're going to have a successful project. And one of those cool use cases of bringing that Revit information into SketchUp is the ability to use our link sharing. So this is a new feature within the last year. If you're not aware of it, it's really, really cool. It allows us to publish a model to Trimble Connect, which is our cloud component of SketchUp, and share our model with anyone. They do not have to have a SketchUp license. They do not have to be a SketchUp user. They don't even need to sign into anything. And this allows us to take that Revit file, put it into SketchUp, publish it to the cloud, and send this out to collaborators so they can ask the questions. They can take measurements. They can see views. They can really know everything about that project and not be limited to maybe 3 or 4 images that are, typically generated from a model, maybe an entrance and an interior. They can orbit around and really understand the nuance of every part of the building, and not requiring someone to have technological, expertise to get into that, I think is really, really beneficial. There's a lot of great designers out there who may not be the most tech savvy, and saving some scenes and publishing this and sharing a link allows them to skip through and orbit and see all of that great information and ask the right questions and start to iterate on designs. And we'll talk about this again a little later in the demo, which I'm going to jump into right now. So we're going to break this down into 3 sections: the Revit importer, Scan Essentials, and then V-Ray. So let's talk about the Revit importer first and get into a quick demo here. So I'm going to go ahead and import a file here. Here we are in SketchUp 2025, and importing in a Revit file is super, super quick. The bigger the Revit file, the longer it's going to take. But give me a second to get to my quick model here. You can also filter in here. If you just find a Revit file, it will only show you those that are in here. So I'm going to go ahead and import in our office in Westminster, Colorado. So the first thing that happens when we select import is it's going to ask you what view you want to import. And this is a super simple model. Revit files, you're likely to have 50 3D views, especially with collaboration. A lot of people are creating different views with view templates. But we may want to set this up in a way that we can import the same file each time. So in this case, because I'm a Revit user and a SketchUp user, I've actually gone into my Revit file and I've created a 3D view called SketchUp Export. So every time I import into SketchUp, it's going to respect the visibility and graphics that I've set up in Revit, and it's only going to import what I'm showing in that Revit view. And this is really, really important. We have the ability to bring in any view, and we can delete and change the visibility of the geometry that comes in. But if we can create view templates in Revit, it's just going to make the process a lot easier. So I'm going to go ahead and just click this guy, and I'm going to import it. And again, this is a very simple model. So chances are you're gonna have a much more complicated Revit file. And you may not have access to that Revit file to create those views, but no sweat. We can toggle visibility off and even delete things, and it'll start to make our file size a lot smaller. So it's gonna tell me my import results, my view, the amount of elements, and that it was successful. And here is my Revit file directly in SketchUp that I can orbit around and start to iterate on. Just want to go over a couple of the basics of what has just happened when this has come in. And like I said, some of the cool things are any Revit family category is going to automatically be converted into a tag. What I like to do is use a tag folder and put this on my Revit import. And this way I can take everything, throw it into that. And if I want to toggle on the visibility like this, I can do that. And if I were to click on a Revit element here, let's use this tree, for example, we see the tag that it's on. This is the Revit family category. And if I come down here and I turn that off, we'll see it'll turn off. This is curtain walls. If you are using certain families, it will tell you what family it is as well, which is cool. So this is my Revit family, basic wall, generic 4-inch brick. Again, it's on that wall tag. So if I needed to maybe do an interior study or something like that, I can turn off my curtain walls, and here's my floors. Again, super, super simple way of doing this. And, you know, in this instance, this is really basic. You see, we didn't have anything on the inside done, but this could be a good use case for early stage design or visualization. Maybe we're putting this into V-Ray to get some feedback. And we can really quickly populate this with 3D warehouse information. Of course, it wants me to sign in. So let's go ahead and sign in real quick so I can use the 3D warehouse. And one cool thing that I like to do is you notice that those SketchUp or the Revit trees that came in, not a great tree. And it just doesn't really work for what I want to do. So if I download this model, and I'm going to put it over here, what I like to do is actually copy this component. And if I edit any component in Revit, it's going to edit all of them. So if I actually delete that and throw my tree inside of that Revit file, we see all of the SketchUp geometry gone through. It's a couple different ways of messing with components and changing things around, but really quickly I can sort of get rid of that basic Revit geometry and get a little more out of it in SketchUp. So, you know, this is too basic of a model, I think, to show the value of the Revit importer, but I just wanted to show you really quickly how things come in. So let's jump into a more complex, cooler import. So this is more typical of a Revit project. It's much more dialed in. We've got furniture, we've got curtain walls. We've got a lot of detail in here. If we zoom in, we can even see that the stairs have been added, interior lighting. This is where I think the importer really, really shines. Because we can add it with SketchUp context, 3D warehouse that I showed a little bit, but we can use add location, we can bring in terrain, we can bring in all of this context. And I think it's awesome. So a couple things that we're gonna show before I sort of show you the finished project of what's possible for a presentation or a fly-through. I do want to just make sure we see the big picture items. Families becoming components, components getting tagged. sections are actually gonna come through and create floor plans. So wherever your floor plan levels are in Revit, SketchUp makes those into sections, which is pretty awesome. So in this case, let's say I go in and I turn on my section planes. Each one of these section planes is a Revit floor plan that has been set up. So if I want to do some sort of interior iteration, some sort of workspace design, interior layout, if I click here and say active cut, and let's go back and turn off my section planes, this is exactly where the cut in our floor plan was going to be. And I wanted to, again, make sure that we see that it is capturing a lot of that data from Revit, that, this is called L4, it's going to be level 4, and this cut is exactly where it's going to be taken out of in Revit. So everything comes in as a solid. So we see the poche that's in here. This can be changed in colors. We see the interior layout of these spaces. So this could be a good use case where maybe we're unsure of the layout of these spaces. Doing a quick iteration within SketchUp rather than doing it to each one of these units in Revit and getting feedback very quickly without worrying about losing annotation or dimensions or messing up another part of the Revit file that someone else is using because we're using central files and we're doing work sharing. We can take stuff from the 3D warehouse and start to generate quick concepts, save them, get some feedback without worrying if we're messing with what's going on in that Revit file. So this is super helpful, I think, to really generate interiors. Not all interior projects are going to be working in Revit. So if we've got an interiors or a Revit file from an architect and I'm an interior designer, I don't need to be forced into working in Revit. I can take their file, come in here and do all of my interiors, do my material studies, my furniture layout, even my egress or code compliance, start to run square footages of materials and create budgets and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. Another great thing that the SketchUp Revit importer does is it respects links. So Revit projects will typically have a linked structural file, a linked electrical file, maybe even a linked civil or landscape file. And those can come in as well. So we can maybe see problematic instances that are hard to capture in Revit. So if we want to hide our ductwork and things like that, those links will come in as a proxy and we can reload them, which I'm not going to do in this case, but I just want to make sure that you know that we can bring in all of the information from a Revit file. And this is just a view, showing that external walls taken away and just how easy it is to sort of maneuver around in here and maybe have a discussion with the lighting designer that we know we're going to maybe need some dropped ceilings or something to hide ductwork, to hide conduit. Pretty difficult to orbit around and do this seamlessly in Revit. And we can just get into SketchUp, ask the questions, make quick changes. And generating sections is really, really useful too. Like in this case, we're not showing any sort of lighting or ductwork or heating or anything in here, but something inevitably is going to need to go in here, and we can even look at possible issues that may arise. Like this case, a pretty complicated detail. That's something that's going to cause an issue in the field. It's going to be very difficult to find a view in Revit that shows that. So importing this into SketchUp really quickly, knowing that this is an issue and being able to solve those issues is really, really helpful. So let's get into how we can combine all of this. So we've got a Revit file that we brought in, but we want to do some presentations. We want to do some fly-throughs. We want to get the client excited about our project. Doing that in Revit isn't really great. So I've gone in and I've used our add location feature to bring in context. I have gone into the 3D warehouse and actually found an existing bridge that I've placed in here. And we've gone and we've just masked out adjacent structures as well. That just helps with the context of everything. So as I orbit around, we can focus on the building here, but also we can view it from further away and maybe ask some bigger picture questions. So maybe we want to see that this building is cool and interesting while we're coming into the city. We can generate this view, talk to the owner, see if we want to make any changes, see if they're happy with this. Maybe this is a potential to create a really cool facade here. Maybe it's some sort of mural or art piece or something that can go in here. That sort of question is hard to ask if we're just staying in Revit. And another thing that we may see as an opportunity here, we've got this great asset of the river adjacent to it, but we only have a few units that have a balcony. As an owner or a developer, you can see immediately that the more balconies we have on this project, probably the higher we can charge tenants for these units. So maybe seeing this, the owner is now seeing maybe we want to change the unit count. We want to put some maybe higher end residential units in here so they can take advantage of that adjacent river. They want views, they want to be outside, they want to barbecue, something like that. Let's add a few more balconies in here, and we could quickly do that, and add things again without going into Revit and doing that. Just real quickly, do we want to add them here? Do we want to move them up here? Really, a quick design iteration is super valuable. Another thing I wanted to show is the ability to adjust textures. So those Revit textures will come in. So this is the Revit texture that's coming in, the brick, all of this comes in. And doing material studies in Revit and design options is definitely a pain. While it's possible, it's just harder to do because it takes a lot of time and effort to set that up. But if we want to maybe do a quick study of maybe different colors of this facade, it's very easy to sample that facade and even just play with the colors a little bit. You can change this to a different texture or something, but I think this is really valuable, especially for me living in Oregon. Whenever I see a gray facade, it's gray a lot here. So why would I want a gray facade if I have the opportunity to maybe make something a little more interesting? And then in this project, there is a historical element of this. So maybe we want to pay a little respect to this brickwork and we want to get to some sort of color that maybe fits a little better, still a contemporary look, but we want to have it fit in with that fabric a little bit. We can present this super quickly to the owner, or maybe we need to get a custom color from the manufacturer of this curtain wall. We can go in and even dial in like the RGB, and we can make sure that exactly what we're looking at gets built correctly. Another cool part, just sort of pushing the limits of what's possible when we get this import into SketchUp, that I like to just quickly talk about. I'm not going to get into detail about it, but with all SketchUp subscriptions, we have SketchUp Diffusion, which is our AI image generator. So if you haven't played with AI at all in your design process, just know it's coming. It's not going to take our jobs. It's a new tool that we can help with production and image generation and iteration, and it's really, really cool. Don't fight it. Welcome it, use it, try to figure out how it can help push our designs further. And what SketchUp Diffusion does is it will take anything that's in our SketchUp window and generate an image from it. This is an auto prompt that comes in here. I'm not going to mess with anything, but there's a lot of different ways to create images out of this, different styles, making it, sort of funkier, artistic sort of versions. I'm just going to go ahead and generate this just so you can sort of see what comes out of this. This is not going to replace the need for something like a V-Ray or an Enscape, a photorealistic sort of deliverable, but it can help maybe suss out some different ideas if we want to do material studies or something, or there's some keywords that are really important to the owner or the developer that they want to use, we can type that in and have AI give us an interpretation of what that means in our project. And with anything AI, just know that it's not perfect each time. It's something that's continuing to be developed. This is actually in our labs program. So we are getting feedback from everybody right now on how to utilize these tools. Hopefully this will actually finish. Different levels of detail will take a little longer, but we'll give this a few more seconds. And if it doesn't go through, there's plenty of resources out there for SketchUp Diffusion. This is the beauty of the live demo, is it's always possible for things to not go as planned. And if it doesn't go, maybe we try one more time. Change the view a little bit, zoom in. If it doesn't go, we will move on to Scan Essentials.
Kyle, while you're doing
Here we
that,
go.
there
Cool.
you go. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Corey.
No, I was just going to ask you, where do folks get access to SketchUp Diffusion? Is that part of Studio, or is that?
It's part of every subscription we have. So it's even included on the iPad, which is really, really cool. So I'll show you how to get access to that right after this. So
Fantastic.
you can see that quick image that came in looks pretty good to me. This is, we have the ability to change the skies, to change the material, things like that. Type in, let AI do its thing. Pretty cool. I definitely recommend playing with it. And if you want to get to it, it is in our extension warehouse. And if you search for it, it's called Diffusion. Here you go. It'll give you a little walkthrough of what it is. You can see that SketchUp model, that finished model in an exterior, sort of what's possible. Really, really cool. Again, it is in public beta. So if you use it, please give us feedback. We want to make sure that we are creating tools that are valuable for its users. If we've got it and it's not solving any problems, it's not valuable to you, it's not valuable for us. So please try it out, go crazy, have fun. It's really, really cool. And it doesn't need to be something detailed either. It could be just a massing concept, really, really early stage design iteration, super valuable. And it'll create, different patterns of curtain walls. There's a lot of different toggles to change shapes if you want to have the prompt change more, if you want the geometry to have more powerful or more power over what we're seeing. It'll even do diffusion. It'll even do image generation for your scans or a sketch that you brought in. It does not need to be SketchUp geometry. So if you've got a really creative and funky design principle that likes to hand draw and you have to interpret that into something real, just import in that image and run diffusion on it and see what AI thinks of that principle's crazy sketch. It's pretty cool. And you can set it up as a background. You can do a lot of stuff. So if you didn't know you have it and you're an active subscriber, you have it. Download it and get to diffusing. Super, super cool. So with that, I'm gonna leave us with the Revit importer. But I did want to show one last thing. Sorry, just to showcase that if we do change one component, that it will change everything. And I think this is helpful. Maybe in this facade that we wanted to add, maybe additional panes or something in this window. If we go and do something like this, right? We see that it changed all of them there. So manipulating families in Revit is definitely a science. It's a difficult thing to do, but adding stuff in SketchUp is super, super quick. And we can decide if we want to have, additional panes, or if this wants to be a more contemporary look where something is actually, fully deleted. Again, we don't have to worry about what impacts that has in our Revit file. And this is just for visualization, and maybe we like this more open look here versus the divided style here. And It's just for different interpretation and different iteration. So I'm going to get out of this Revit file and let's talk Scan Essentials. Let's get back into here. All right. So Scan Essentials. Scan Essentials is an extension that integrates point cloud data into SketchUp. This is really, really cool. Point clouds are becoming more common into workflows, especially for complex projects, complex sites, renovations of old buildings. And when I did historic preservation, I was going into 120-year-old buildings with a tape measure and a laser measure, and would have to go back to that building 10 times because the measurements just weren't adding up. If I had the ability to take a point cloud and put it into my file and start to model on top of it, it would have saved me so much time. And the great thing is scans aren't the cheapest thing in the world, so we're getting a lot more value out of these point cloud scans. They can come from terrestrial scanners, drone scans, even new iPhones and new iPads have scanners in them. You can scan rooms, you can scan objects, bring them into SketchUp. And again, it's all with this goal of improving collaboration. So more eyes on the prize again, successful projects. And this is just a quick GIF kind of showing a scan coming in and the SketchUp tools being used on top of it. So all of the SketchUp tools will snap to the point cloud. We can take measurements. We can make super precise models from point clouds. But a lot of the point clouds are such good resolution and clarity that we may not need to model all of that stuff. It may just be for an interior layout or maybe a rehabilitation of a certain part of a building. We don't need to model everything. We can kind of ghost in that point cloud, and we'll talk about that again in the demo that's coming up. And this is just a quick idea of the workflow. So we've got a scan here of an existing building in a complex historic building with a lot of information. Maybe it's hard to measure all of this stuff. Not all buildings are easy to get access to, but if we can scan them, it's a lot safer to get that data. It's not always about buildings either. It could be large sites. It could be infrastructure. We have customers who take point cloud scans of areas like affected by disaster. Maybe it's unsafe to go into a building due to an earthquake or a fire or something, but they want to try to help move that project along, or the renovation or the safe dismantling of a building. They can scan that and sort of have a game plan about how to get everybody out there safe, rather than again going in with a tape measure or something like that. So this example is sort of maybe an old building that has maybe been condemned, but we are renovating this. We're putting new structure in it. We can take that point cloud file, make a SketchUp model, share that with the structural engineers, and coordinate the best way to bring this building back to life, and even render it back out here and communicate the design intent. So essentially 3 steps: capture the data with a scanner, model and iterate, and then with all things SketchUp, share it with people for feedback to ensure that the project is successful. And there are a lot of different use cases. Scanners are in all sorts of different workflows and environments. I talked about the renovation and historic preservation. Before and after is a cool use case. Site conditions and just sort of operation and maintenance of existing assets is really, really helpful. And spatial feasibility. So maybe we're owners and we're looking at a variety of buildings that are potential places for us to buy and renovate. We can scan them, see if our ideas will work out in SketchUp, and be able to either pursue certain buildings that we think will work for us, or just say, nope, that's not going to work for us because we scanned it and put some stuff in it. So let's jump into a quick demo again and look at some of these options. So here is a scan. I'm gonna go over a few buildings so we can hopefully make sense. This is a scan that was brought in via a terrestrial scanner, so that's scanner on a tripod. As we orbit around, we see all of the data that's in here. Here's our interior scan. So none of this is modeled. This is just an interior scan of this building. We see these circles here. If we look on the floor plan, This is where those scanners were coming in and capturing the data. If I orbit around, we see that it respects our SketchUp sections. And if I wanted to, take quick measurements, like maybe we want the spacing of this column, we can snap to 2 points, get a quick idea of the spacing, which again is really, really helpful. There's a lot of different ways to view this. So we can create clipping boxes, which is really, really helpful. What this does is allows us to maybe focus on our scope of work. So if we're only focused on this area over here, we can quickly clip that, essentially giving a section box, and we can see the inside of our building super detailed. And this is our toolbar before I get too crazy in here. So a lot of different ways to see the model, opacities, point size if we took a bad quality scan, different ways to see colors or scanning stations. If it's a terrain, you can see via elevation, which is helpful. The next example I'll show will be that. And let's keep it on the photorealistic one. And I want to just sort of skip through a couple scenes here and talk about this. So in this example, maybe we want to renovate this building with new systems. It's an old building that we want to renovate, so it needs new HVAC, it needs new lighting. We can click to each point and actually model things on top of this. So if I turn my scan back on, there's a way to select. So point cloud pick versus SketchUp pick. So if I click on point cloud, you see that it's trying to snap to these points. So I can come in here and make sure that this is, this is creating a surface directly on that point cloud, which is how I went in and created the structure. And then I went and I start to implement new HVAC. I can orbit around. I've even got the existing electrical in here. And then I can see if maybe my new use is worthwhile. So I've gone in and went into the 3D warehouse and found some information here that I need to renovate this. This idea, maybe in this day and age, it's a cool new brewery or something, and we need to make sure that all of the tanks and all of the equipment can fit into this. We know the system that we're using, but we have some pretty important elements in here, like this interesting truss that really can't be moved. So are we going to run into problems with some sort of system? So because of that, we've modeled out all of the existing conditions before we put in our new tanks. One great feature of Scan Essentials is the ability to verify information via inspection map. So what this does is it tells me everything that I have modeled. Again, if I turn off my scan, this is everything I've modeled directly off of the point cloud. I've got them in here sort of transposed on each other. But if I do my inspection map, everything in green tells me that I've modeled within 200 millimeters of accuracy, and things in red are not as accurate. So 200 millimeters is a very small threshold, and this tells me that this is all modeled accurate enough, and then I can start to do my studies. So I've got value out of that point cloud, and I may no longer need it anymore. And then I move into my, no scan, put in my tank design, and I can orbit around and see if there are any issues. Of course, there are some issues. We've got a tight fit here. Is this tolerance going to be able to work for these existing conditions? And setting up sort of clash detection. So, we've got pipe that's going to go through this light. We're probably going to get rid of this light. Again, is this more important to have this old tray lighting? Probably going to get rid of it, but we know those problems before we get in and building it. Cool part of this too is it does push out to layout. So I can create as-built documentation from this point cloud, even really without modeling anything. And so I've got a PDF here that I've created in layout, which is our paper space component of SketchUp. And we can see our interior scan. We can even shoot dimensions here of our existing windows. And we get a floor plan and a ceiling plan to better understand the asset and sort of before and after. So I've got a section here, transverse section and a longitudinal section, and then of my design that I'm going to put in here. So is this going to work? And I can get feedback really without doing much modeling at all. And setting up views like I showed of, the basic structure, when we're going to add in HVAC, and getting scaled drawings out of that scan without really doing much, I think is super helpful. And then a cool way of putting that all on top of each other. So this could be another use case for like CA as well. If we're taking scans throughout the project and making sure that things were built as designed, we can take a scan of the building, overlap it with our design model, and ensure that things were installed correctly so we can make sure that project is on budget, on schedule, and is going to be successful for the tenant to move in at the time that we hoped they would move in. So I want to get into one more example of a scan that's maybe not a building that I think is super beneficial to look at. And this would be of a site, a fresh site. So let's go into this guy. We're not going to save this. We're going to open up this scan, which is a drone scan, which is pretty cool. I'm going to unload current cloud, make sure we put in our new point cloud. And you can see how fast it loads in a point cloud file. It just took a second. And this is our point cloud here. So this has a clipping box on it. Make sure I turn it off. Where is that guy? There we go. There it is. It's over here. Cool. So one of the great use cases of this is to actually generate terrain. For some reason, I don't know why this clipping box is not showing, so I may need to open up a different file. Let's open up a different file and hope that this one works a little better. Let's load in that file. For some reason, it's not finding the correct point cloud. Let's try one more, and then I may move on to a GIF of it. It's not working for me. The tool I wanted to show is that you have the ability to auto-generate terrain from this point cloud. So if you do have a complex terrain, really with the click of a button, you can get SketchUp geometry from it, which is super, super helpful for cut and fill, for site staging, a lot of different opportunities, I think. So in this case, we can see our point cloud again over top of some context that's been generated here. And this is an instance of maybe a before and after sort of thing too. We can study utilities. These are really hard things to capture and get value from. And as we orbit around, not all buildings. This could be, a complex landscape. There's a lot of, pathways and things that we need to take into account. And we can do feasibility studies too. So if we do have a complex site that we need to get certain machinery to, we can ensure that we can get the machinery there, again, to have a successful project. So a lot of different feasibility. Before and after studies, I think, is super helpful. So if we've got two potential designs, we can see which one will work the best. And hopefully this is sort of showing the potential of what's possible with these point clouds. And since we're running low on time, I do want to make sure that I get to V-Ray as well. If you are using point clouds, I highly recommend taking a look at SketchUp Studio, because bringing those point clouds into SketchUp really, really is super valuable. And it's just so easy to manipulate and get more more use out of that data that you've worked so hard to do. Because the most up-to-date data is going to be from that point cloud scan that you took last week. Those existing drawings or aerial imagery or things like that, there's always the opportunity to get wrong or misleading information. And if you can capture a point cloud and bring it in, it's great. It will import in like 5 or 6 different file types. So E57, LAS, TZF, PLY, again, from your drone scan, from your personal scanner, from from a high grade terrestrial scanner, all of those will come in into SketchUp. And actually, this is great. So I have an animation of that. Unfortunately, that image that I wasn't shown. So this is that drone scan. And if I were to make a rectangle over an area that I wanted to automatically generate terrain from, I just click that face, say generate terrain, figure out the amount of detail that I want on that terrain, and boom, I will have my terrain. So it can be super detailed for cut and fills, for site staging, any of that stuff that we really need to sort of visualize, maybe not a building, but the logistics of a site. So a lot of big contractors are using this to ensure that they are placing the site office in a great place, that they can get materials onto the site, really that game plan that they can take the architect or the designer's intent and build it correctly in a speedy and a speedy and respectful manner. So last but not least, we're going to talk quickly about V-Ray. I'm not going to demo V-Ray because V-Ray is such a powerful visualization software that if you are interested in V-Ray, I highly recommend that you look into the resources that Chaos Group has created. So V-Ray is a third-party tool developed by Chaos Group, and we've partnered with them to ensure that we put it into SketchUp Studio to deliver the most powerful and impactful subscription for our users. So V-Ray gives us the ability to generate photorealistic materials and images. So what you're looking at is not a photograph. This is a high resolution rendering created via V-Ray. And the amount of control in it when it comes to lighting, environments, really to sort of to sell that vibe or the feel of what this building will look like when it's occupied. Really, there is no other way to generate this amount of detail on something other than V-Ray. V-Ray really is that highest level of photorealistic rendering out there. There's a lot of great rendering engines out there. V-Ray is really the tippy top of it, of what's possible when it comes to photorealism. And I've just, again, because I can't demo all of this, it's just a quick video of sort of what's possible. You can really, really dial in the details. I mean, if you've got a plane in SketchUp and it has a grass texture to it, V-Ray knows to populate that with blades of grass. You're right. There's just so many possibilities and really interesting use cases for V-Ray. It's extremely impressive if you want to get to this level of visualization. So a lot of times this level of deliverable is maybe not necessary for an architectural project. It usually comes maybe a little later down the road for that next project pursuit or proposal of what's possible. So really, really useful for RFPs, really good for marketing potential. If you've trying to sell out a tenant space in the first floor of a commercial building and you can show maybe a retailer or a restaurant what's possible, make a couple quick SketchUp iterations and then share that with a coming soon and what's possible, and be able to share that idea with someone who may not be able to interpret that themselves. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with before we leave a couple minutes for Q&A is just sort of all of this in one sort of process, right? So the first part of this animation showed that SketchUp diffusion, where maybe we're doing some material studies. Do we want to have this simple structure be wood? Do we want it to be concrete? real quick and dirty iteration. And then we're bringing in Revit and consultant models into SketchUp's environment. We can create fly-throughs and animations to really fully understand the systems that are going to be built, to get any sort of problems out of the way, to really visualize every aspect of it, but in a more interesting way than 2D documentation. And then populating this with V-Ray assets to get a photorealistic render. So this is just to reiterate that SketchUp from the start, the first part of programming a building to the finished coordination in CA, and those awesome photorealistic images that are possible with V-Ray, SketchUp is used throughout the entire project, not just that conceptual and schematic design. It's the coordination, it's the iteration, it's the presentation to the owners, to the stakeholders, to the developers, to really get trust in why they hired you in the first place to design something. That transparency that you're continuing to work with them, that everything is on schedule, that we're working back and forth with those collaborators. Using SketchUp at every phase of the project is really, really valuable. So with that, hopefully we've got a few minutes for Q&A. If any questions did pop up into the meeting, I'm happy to address them.
Hey, Kyle, this is Corey again. Question, are there any limitations that you are aware of with the Revit importer? Are there any gotchas that architects and designers may consider going back and forth between Revit and SketchUp like this?
Yeah, so there's a handful of things to keep in mind. So like with SketchUp 2025, if your company has moved on to Revit 2026, those Revit 2026 files will not import into SketchUp 2025. One of the big issues with Revit is there's no ability to downsave Revit files. So companies are usually pretty hesitant or need to have a game plan when they're pushing into a new version of Revit, because every consultant, every user needs to get into that new version. Now, when we release newer versions of SketchUp, we work really hard to be able to import in those new versions of Revit, but with Autodesk not sharing their software development kit and things like that, it makes it impossible for us to import in newer versions of Revit into older versions of SketchUp, if that makes sense. So yes. The optimization of Revit files is crazy. You could have a half a gig Revit file, importing that into SketchUp and not doing anything to it will make the file size like a fifth of the size. So it's really rare to get a Revit model that gets brought into SketchUp and you cannot use it. So that's where creating or viewing, importing in a specific Revit view really helps a lot, because in a lot of instances, we don't need to import in the sinks or specialty equipment from that Revit file that may be really geometry intense. We can just get rid of that if we're importing in a specific Revit view, or just deleting those tags in SketchUp and purging our model. We'll get rid of all of that extra Revit information and keep our SketchUp model a lot more clean and tidy.
Another one on the Revit side of the equation, just out of curiosity. Can the Revit importer handle sheets and details and things like that, or is that completely separate?
No, so that's all 2D information in Revit. Yep. So that's the annotations and all of that is all 2D information. So it's only going to import in 3D views. The sheets are all 2D views, and that's because Revit families have it's not just 3D geometry, it's symbolic lines, it's annotations. That stuff doesn't come in, and that's that optimization that happens. So you would be able to import in that sheet if you had a JPEG of that sheet and bring it into scale and trace over it. But the complexity of those Revit families, all of that stuff on a 2D sheet, it's not actually showing any 3D geometry. It's all symbolic line work. So if you import it in a sheet, it would just be lines. So I would probably recommend exporting out a DWG file from those sheets and bringing that into SketchUp. And that way it would come into scale, and you could bring that in with a Revit import as well, and verify things or model on top of it if necessary. And that CAD line work would come in on its own tag as well.
We're at time, but I do have one more question for you.
Sure.
Selfishly, with Scan Essentials and using that tool, I've played around with some iPad scans and brought those in. During your demo today, it seemed to be that maybe there was some more functionality exposed in Scan Essentials based on the scanners, maybe scanner data or scanner types that we're using there. Is that the case?
That is the case. Yes. In this instance, if I were to go into the point cloud manager, the way that you register the point cloud, so I'm not positive on different scanning software for the iPad, but like for a terrestrial scanner, a Trimble scanner, you can segment it and say that you want certain information to be on a certain layer, and you have the ability to toggle that information off here. So if you wanted to toggle off like the vegetation, you would need to register that in a different software, and then you could turn it off in these instances. So like all of this stuff gives you a little more control, but that's up to the person who's doing the scan to make sure that this stuff works correctly. But that's where like the clipping box and the section tools really come into play, because you can get a clipping box from it and you can start to just quickly crop out things. Like if I didn't need the power lines, but someone didn't set this up in a way, if I just if I clip that out, which it's because I've got two of these guys on. If I activate this guy, it'll clip out everything that was above it. So there are some controls in there for sure. There's also one of the visualizations here are to do it via station. So if you had different scanners, you would be able to have a little more control. Like this station is giving off a green. And I'm never the one who takes the scans, so I don't fully understand how this stuff gets registered. That's why we're just trying to get more value out of the scan data, especially if you're getting it from a third party or a collaborator. We can visualize things directly on top of that. Great question, though.
Cool.
Anything else?
I think we're good. Debbie, you want to close up?
Oh, I just want to tell everybody thank you for joining us today, Kyle. That was awesome, and happy birthday to your son.
Thank you.
And we will email recording of this, so in case anybody missed it. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.